Welcome back, class. Today we are talking about World War II still, and we're talking about the Battle of Midway. And the Battle of Midway, I'm not talking about a whole lot of battles during this war because I don't want to confuse all of you. But the Battle of Midway was a very important battle in World War II, and it was a turning point in the Pacific of the war. So that's why we're going over this. And the United States wound up winning it, and they sank a bunch of aircraft carriers, which pretty much broke the Japanese back when they did this. So that's what we're talking about, the Battle of Midway today. Like I said, it was one of the most important battles of World War II, and it was the turning point in the war in the Pacific between the United States and Japan. It took place over 4 days, June the 4th, between June the 4th and June the 7th in 1942.
Battle of Midway. The Battle of Midway was one of the most important battles of World War II. It was the turning point of the war in the Pacific between the United States and Japan. The battle took place over 4 days between June the 4th and June the 7th in 1942.
All right, so where is Midway? Midway is an island located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. All right, it's right here where it took place. It's halfway between Asia and North America, and that's why it's called Midway. It lies around 2,500 miles from Japan, and because of its location, Midway was considered a very important strategic island for Japan in the war. Right here's the Battle of Midway. Right here's Hawaii. Right here's Japan.
Where is Midway? Midway is an island located in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, about halfway between Asia and North America, hence the name Midway. It lies around 2,500 miles from Japan. Because of its location, Midway was considered an important strategic island for Japan in the war.
All right, so the Doolittle Raid on April 18, 1942, the United States, it launched its first attack on Japan, on the Japanese home islands, and it caused the Japanese to want to push back. All right, they would say, "Hey, we want y'all out of the Pacific Ocean. We need to get y'all back out of here because y'all are a threat to us." So they decided to attack the American base at Midway Island.
The Doolittle Raid. On April 18, 1942, the United States launched its first attack on the Japanese homelands. This raid caused the Japanese to want to push back the American presence in the Pacific Ocean. They decided to attack the American base at Midway Island.
All right, so how this battle began was the Japanese came up with a plan, and what they did, they hoped to trap a number of the U.S. aircraft carriers, because I told you in an earlier video, the aircraft carriers were very important during the war. They're very important for all of it. So they want to put them in a bad situation where they could destroy them, though. The American code breakers, though, intercepted a number of Japanese transmissions, so they knew the plan. They figured out, they were able to decode it, and they figured out, okay, this is what they're going to do. So what they did, they prepared their own trap for the Japanese.
How did the battle begin? The Japanese formulated a plan to sneak up on the U.S. forces. They hoped to trap a number of the U.S. aircraft carriers in a bad situation where they could destroy them. However, American code breakers had intercepted a number of Japanese transmissions. The Americans knew the Japanese plans and prepared their own trap for the Japanese.
All right, so the Japanese were led by Admiral Yamamoto, this guy right here. All right, he was the same leader who planned the attack on Pearl Harbor. And the United States were led by Admirals Chester Nimitz, Frank Jack Fletcher, and Raymond A. Spruance. These were the commanders in this battle during the Battle of Midway.
Who were the commanders in the battle? The Japanese were led by Admiral Yamamoto. He was the same leader who planned the attack on Pearl Harbor. The United States was led by Admirals Chester Nimitz, Frank Jack Fletcher, and Raymond A. Spruance.
All right. So this battle took place between June 4th and June the 7th. On June 4th, 1942, the Japanese, they launched a bunch of fighter planes and bombers from 4 different aircraft carriers to attack the island of Midway. Meanwhile, the United States aircraft carriers, the Enterprise, the Hornet, and the Yorktown, they were closing in on the Japanese force while they were getting ready to launch these attacks.
The Japanese attack. On June 4th, 1942, the Japanese launched a number of fighter planes and bombers from 4 aircraft carriers to attack the island of Midway. Meanwhile, 3 United States aircraft carriers, Enterprise, Hornet, and Yorktown, were closing in on the Japanese force.
All right. So the Japanese was focused on attacking Midway. The U.S. carriers launched their own attack. And the first wave of these planes were torpedo bombers. And what it is, they'd come and they would drop torpedoes down in the water, and it would go underneath the water and try to hit whatever they were aiming at. These planes would fly low. They'd try to drop torpedoes. And the Japanese were able to fend off the torpedo attacks. And most of the U.S. torpedo attack planes were shot down, and none of the torpedoes hit the target. But it wasn't the only planes that they launched. They also launched bombers, not only the torpedo planes. They launched bombers as well, which we'll talk about on the next slide.
A surprise response. While the Japanese were focused on attacking Midway, the U.S. carriers launched an attack. The first wave of planes were torpedo bombers. These planes would fly in low and try to drop torpedoes that would strike the side of the ships to sink them. The Japanese were able to fend off the torpedo attacks. Most of the U.S. torpedo attack planes were shot down, and none of the torpedoes hit their targets.
While the Japanese were aimed low, though, they were aimed low trying to hit these torpedo planes. All right. The American dive bombers dove in. They attacked from high up in the sky. And these bombs hit their target, and 3 of the 4 Japanese aircraft carriers were sunk. And total for this whole battle, all 4 of them were sunk.
A surprise response continued. However, while the Japanese guns were aimed low at the torpedo bombers, American dive bombers dove in and attacked from high up in the sky. These bombs hit their targets, and 3 of the 4 Japanese aircraft carriers were sunk.
All right, so the Yorktown sinks. The Yorktown was one of the U.S.'s aircraft carriers or destroyers. They were engaged with the final Japanese carrier, the Hiryu. Okay, well, both carriers were able to launch a number of bombers against the other, and in the end, the Yorktown and the Hiryu were both sunk. So that means the Japanese lost 4 aircraft carriers during this battle. That's a bunch.
The Yorktown sinks. The Yorktown then engaged in battle with the final Japanese carrier, the Hiryu. Both carriers were able to launch a number of bombers against the other. In the end, both the Yorktown and the Hiryu were sunk.
All right. So the results of this battle, the loss of 4 aircraft carriers was devastating to the Japanese. All right. They lost 4, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 Japanese carriers. They also lost a number of other ships, 248 aircraft, over 3,000 sailors were lost. This battle was a turning point in the war and the first major victory for the Allies in the Pacific.
Results of the battle. The loss of 4 aircraft carriers was devastating to the Japanese. They also lost a number of other ships, 248 aircraft, and over 3,000 sailors. This battle was a turning point in the war and the first major victory for the Allies in the Pacific.
All right, comprehension questions. What was one of the most important battles in World War II? We talked about it today. A, the Battle of Midway, B, the Battle of Yorktown, or C, Palmetto Ranch. It was A, the Battle of Midway. That's what we talked about today. It was a turning point in the war, in the Pacific part of the war.
Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner.
Number 2, what island is located in the Pacific Ocean between Asia and North America? Is it A, England, B, Midway, or C, Coney Island? It is B, Midway. Right here is Midway, and it's located in the middle between the Pacific Ocean and Asia. Right here's Hawaii, right here's the Japanese Empire, right here's Midway.
Ding, ding, ding.
That's where the battle took place.
A
What did the Japanese hope to do at the Battle of Midway? A, trap the American carriers and destroy them. B, nothing. Or C, get around them. A, they wanted to trap these American carriers and then destroy them.
Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner.
All right. Number 4, how many Japanese carriers were lost during the battle? Was it A, 1, B, 4, or C, 50? There were 4 aircraft carriers that sunk, and it pretty much broke the Japanese back with that. And it was a big turning point because they had lost all those aircraft carriers.
Ding, ding, ding. We have a winner.
And that's the last of our comprehension questions. Like I said, the Battle of Midway was a big turning point in the war for the Pacific side of the war anyway, not the European side, but the Pacific side of the war. And it was our first major victory, the first U.S.'s first major victory, or the Allies' first major victory. And so that's what we talked about today. And I hope you all have a good day, because it's the last of our stuff for right now. And I will see you all next time. You all have a very good day.